Just for those of you who don't know me, so I've been in the industry since 1999, so it's been 25 years. Started in a commercial gym like a lot of people, but in 2005, I moved to the US, and that's when I really started training athletes. And 2016, we started Kilo, and then the business kind of evolved towards education. But my background or my passion in the field really is sports performance, mostly for team sports. So although this course is a course about sports performance, there is somewhat of a team sport bias. So I just wanted to be clear with everybody on this. We're going to start if you guys are ready. So developing speed strength for sports performance. So speed strength is kind of, oh, wait a second. Okay, so speed strength is a little bit of a complicated topic. It's a topic I've been studying for a while now, and there's a lot to discover here. But speed strength, that term, it's kind of an old school term, but what it actually is, to be quite honest, is a synonym for power. It's like the term that was used in research in the 70s and 80s, mostly in Europe. So being a fan of history, of strength training history, I like to give reference to that term speed strength. But just for the context of this course, understand that it actually is a synonym for power. So in this course, what we're going to focus on, so there's going to be like 4 sections or 4 modules if you want to the course. The first part, we're going to talk about the role of maximal strength in the development of speed strength. So max strength, really important for speed strength, and we're going to dig a little bit into what it actually means. We're going to talk about the force velocity and the force time curve, because I think it's really crucial to truly understand these concepts if we want to understand how to implement all of these speed strength methods. Then we're going to talk specifically on how we can develop speed strength. So like the training methods associated to the development of speed strength. And then finally, we're going to talk about the assessment and implementation of speed strength within a specific preparation phase for your athletes. So before we start, I think it's important that we speak the same language. So we're just going to define the overarching terms that we're going to be discussing in this course. So the classification of strength qualities. So you have limit strength. So limit strength is basically like I'm sure you guys have all heard the term or the expression of you have a mom and the child is stuck underneath a car, and somehow the mom like develops the strength to move the car to save the child. So this is limit strength. So it's the peak force the neuromuscular system can produce in a single maximum involuntary contraction. So it's involuntary. It's really, really hard to truly access limit strength with a maximal voluntary contraction. So on your own, you're never really going to be able to recruit all motor units or all your muscle fibers. Hartmann and Thunemann, German scientists, in their research, they've established that the untrained person will recruit up to about a maximum of about 60% of all of their muscle fibers, whereas the highly trained athletes, so let's say like throwers in track and field, they can recruit up to 85, sometimes 90% of all of their motor units. So even the elite cannot reach limit strength, okay? But limit strength is still important in the context of what we're going to talk about today, okay? So maximum peak force that is involuntary. Then we have maximal strength. So the peak force the neuromuscular system can produce in a single maximal voluntary contraction, irrespective of time. So your expression of strength here does not have a time constraint. So we know that for most actions, it takes a minimum of about 300 milliseconds in order to exert maximal force. It can be much longer, over 400 milliseconds sometimes, but we just know that after 300 to 400 milliseconds, the rise in force becomes very small. We're talking about like a 2 or 3% change in force after that, okay? But maximal strength, a good example of this would be a power lifter, where they have their 1 RM, and then they have all the time in the world to exert that force to live their 1 rep max, but it's voluntary, okay? So maximal strength will be kind of like a, a good expression of your concentric, eccentric, and isometric strength, but understand that it will always be less than your limit strength. Then we have speed strength. So like I said earlier, speed strength is a synonym for power. So you have the speed component, you have the strength component, and this is everything that's in between. So the ability of the neuromuscular system to produce the greatest amount of force in the shortest time possible. So now we have a time constraint. Okay? It's about being strong but fast within speed strength. So speed strength is the overarching term. Within speed strength, we have three main qualities. We have starting strength, which is the capacity to quickly generate maximum force at the beginning of a muscular contraction to overcome resistance and initiate movement. So a good example here is like Bruce Lee's 1-inch punch, okay? So you don't have a lot of time to exert force because you only have 1-inch distance to cover, but you have to generate a lot of force in a very, very, very short time in order to generate the action. And the outside resistance, in that case, is really light, but you still need to overcome it. So Fred Hatfield has a good analogy with this. He says that starting strength is kind of like the flash of a camera. It's like this quick burst of force that comes out really, really quickly and dissipates really, really quickly, okay? So usually starting strength requires lighter external resistances, but it's about your ability to generate a ton of force early at the beginning of the movement to create the momentum to propulse yourself during your concentric action. Then we have explosive strength, which is the capacity to quickly develop an increasing rise in force once the movement has been initiated. So basically, it's a follow-up, if you want, of starting strength. Now, explosive strength, it's about your ability to keep accelerating that load that you've already initiated. But because you have more distance to cover, or not necessarily more distance, I'm sorry, because you have more load to overcome, you have a longer time frame, and because you have a longer time frame, you're able to generate more force, because your ability to generate force, like I said earlier, is subjected to a time constraint. If it takes 300 to 400 milliseconds to generate maximal force, and you're throwing a shot in shot put, for example, well, you need to be able to generate a lot of force in a much quicker time than 400 milliseconds. Okay, so to do this, you need to keep accelerating that load through the entire concentric range of motion. To come back to Fred Hatfield's example, for explosive strength, he's talking more about like those like floodlights where you turn on, and the longer the light stays on, the brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter the light gets. Okay, so this would be explosive strength. So explosive strength and starting strength are separate quality, but they both work together in the expression of power. Now, the other strength quality is we have reactive strength. So reactive strength, this is your ability to quickly transition from an eccentric to a concentric contraction as fast as possible. So you're basically storing kinetic energy during the eccentric contraction within the tendons and the tissue to allow you to use that elastic energy to generate a more forceful and faster concentric contraction. So this is if you want the fastest, but also usually the lightest of the strength quality involved in speed strength, okay? But reactive strength, explosive strength, and starting strength are components of the entire speed strength family. Okay, so now that we've covered these definitions, let's talk about the role of maximal strength in speed strength development. So German strength researcher Dietmar Schmidblicher has a quote that I really like. And his quote is, "Strength is the mother of all qualities." So in the initial stages of training, the focus should be on increasing your level of maximal strength as much as possible, because the stronger you are up to a certain point, and we'll cover that a little later, but the higher your potential will be to generate power and or later on generate speed, okay? So strength is at the base of everything. It cannot be omitted if you really, really want to optimize speed strength outcomes. So maximal strength, it's basically the foundation of everything. And an expression I like is foundation. Your foundation will set the stage for success later on in your training. So one aspect of maximal strength that I think makes it a little bit easier to understand why it's so important is the strength reserve. So what the strength reserve is let's say we have athlete A and athlete B. They both weigh 100 kilos. One of them, so athlete A squats 125 kilos, and athlete B squats 200 kilos. So the strength reserve basically is you take the body weight in this case, and your squat 1RM of 200 kilos. So here we have a strength reserve with athlete B of 100 kilograms, whereas our athlete A, the strength reserve is only 25 kilograms. So if we ask both athletes to, let's say, do a jump squat with, let's say, 10 kilos on their back, well, athlete B will most likely be able to jump higher because his strength reserve is greater. So his potential to generate a forceful contraction is much greater. Okay, so that's the strength reserve. But to put it plainly, like if, for example, you bench press 100 kilograms and you want to work on power, on peak power, and you're using 50% of 1RM to do your set. So 50% of 100 kilogram is 50 kilos. Now you increase maximal strength to 150 kilos. Now you want to work peak power later on. So you're working at 50% of 1RM again. Well, now, because you increase maximal strength to 150 kilos, now your 50% becomes 75 kilos. So if you're able to do your set with 75 kilo, which is 50% of your new 1RM at the same speed that you were able to do your set at 50 kilo, well, then you're more powerful by default. So this, I think it's a very easy way to understand the importance of maximal strength up to a certain point, okay? Because at the end of the day, the higher 1RM, the easier it is to generate force and speed with a certain percentage of your body weight, with a certain weight that's fixed as a percentage of your 1RM. So like I said earlier, like the strength reserve, so we saw that the athlete A, if he's squatting for 1 rep, 100 kilogram, that's 80% of his 1RM, whereas athlete B squatting 1 rep, 100 kilogram, that's 50% of 1RM. So again, it's going to be much easier for athlete B to do a fast squat 100 kilo than athlete A to do a fast squat 100 kilo. Okay, so that's plainly all what the strength reserve is. When we talk about training for maximal strength, it's important to understand that like the research, it's a little bit over the place in the sense that a lot of research talks about 85% of 1RM and over, but the majority of studies show that the minimum threshold is 80%. So it's fair to say that in order to improve maximal strength, any training done at an intensity higher than 80% of 1 RM will help in your quest of developing maximal strength. What maximal strength training does is, oh, sorry, I forgot this slide. So before we talk about what I was going to bring about, we have to understand the muscle actions, because maximal strength is not just a reflection of concentric strength. Okay, so we have concentric muscle actions, eccentric, and isometric. So you can build maximal strength with concentric modalities, eccentric, and isometric modalities. It doesn't matter if it's submax or maximal, supramaximal, eccentrics, yielding, isometric, or overcoming isometric. You can generate maximal strength with these modes of contraction. Now, one thing to understand is eccentric contractions, you'll typically be able to be about 40% stronger than you are concentrically. And isometrically, you should be able to be about 10 to 20% stronger than you are concentrically. Okay? So you have to keep that in mind. Like the stress that eccentric and isometric training will put on the athlete will be greater than concentric in the context of maximal strength, simply because the load potential are greater. So this is why the majority of the training should be concentric based, sparkled in with some eccentric and isometric work from time to time. Now, why maximal strength is so important for speed strength. So we understand the strength reserve. It's pretty straightforward, but it has to do with intramuscular coordination. So maximal strength training will improve intermuscular coordination, but not that much. In order to really improve intermuscular coordination, we need to use lighter loads, okay? But intramuscular coordination will be highly stimulated with maximal strength work. What is intramuscular coordination? It's the ability of your nervous system to recruit motor units or recruit fibers within a specific muscle. So by working on maximal strength, you'll improve your recruitment potential. So the amount of motor units you're actually activating. So I was saying earlier from Hartman and Tuneman's work that the untrained athlete can barely recruit 60% of their motor unit potential. Well, by doing maximal strength training, you can bring this up to, let's say, 70%, 75%, and then the elite, that 85 to 90% window. But you need to train that. And honestly, maximal strength training is probably the most straightforward way to train your ability to recruit more motor units. Now, another important thing that is trained with maximal strength is your firing rate, also known as rate coding. So the frequency of impulses sent to the motor units. So what happens is when you're dealing with heavy weights, you're recruiting your motor units. But then in order to keep generating more and more and more force to push through the rep, your nervous system is sending impulses through the motor units. And these impulses, like they get discharged at really, really, really high frequency to the point where at one point you have almost one full tetanic contraction. So that's how you're actually stronger, by just having faster and faster and faster impulses sent to the muscles within the motor units. And then finally, maximal strength training will help with synchronization of the recruitment of motor units. So your ability to recruit simultaneously a wide range of motor units within a specific muscle. Okay, so this is very important. Like intramuscular coordination, in my opinion, is at the core of why maximal strength training is so important for speed strength development. There's also impact on inhibitory signals. There's with heavy weights, you get this stretch reflex input where at one point, when you're lifting heavy weights and you're in the bottom of a bench press, for example, you will notice
Cool.
that the Golgi tendon organs will feel that the load is too high, and it's going to not allow you to keep generating force in order to protect itself. Okay, so the more you train it, the more you're inhibiting this mechanism so that the Golgi tendon organs won't kick in as early. So it's going to allow you by default to be using higher levels of weight. And then finally, you have an increase in specific hypertrophy of fast twitch fibers. So we have the type 1 fibers that are the slow twitch fibers. They really don't have a lot of impact in speed strength because their velocity potential are too low. But the fast twitch fibers, the 2A and the 2X, especially the 2X, have a lot of importance or a lot of impact on your ability to generate speed strength. We know that fast twitch fibers have a lot more potential for size and a lot more potential for high velocity contractions. Some studies talk about like twice the potential. So by increasing the hypertrophy of the cross-section area, so what's going to happen within the muscle fiber is that the cross-section of the heavy chain myosin head will be bigger. And by having a bigger cross-section area, your contraction potential should be more, like you should be able to generate more force because of the bigger, fast twitch, heavy chain myosin head binding to the actin. And then kind of like the same thing with the speed potential. If you have a bigger, fast twitch type 2X fibers that have more velocity potential in binding to the actin, well, again, it's going to help by default with your speed strength potential. But what's really, really important to understand is maximal strength training, so training at 80% of 1RM or over, can only carry over to speed strength if there's attention spent on making sure that the concentric contraction is performed with the intent of accelerating the load as much as possible. Okay, that's really important. The term is called intended maximal concentric acceleration. It was a term like that was coined in the 40s, but basically you're training with heavy weights, so you know that the velocity won't be fast, but you're trying, coming off the bottom of your bench, for example, you're purposely trying to accelerate that load as fast as possible, even if the velocity is not there. So in a tempo prescription, if you're using the tempo system, the third number, which represents the concentric, you would see a X. The X means as fast as possible, irrespective of the actual time. Because one thing that's important to understand is speed strength is a reflection of movement speed, yes, but mostly contraction speed. So sometimes, even if the actual velocity of the movement is not that high, it does not necessarily mean that the velocity of or the speed of contraction of the muscle fiber is not fast. Okay, like a good example of this, if you look at research, they do a lot of research with the isometric mid-thigh pull. Well, they're able to generate explosive strength with a isometric exercise. The isometric exercise has no movement. So we can't say that movement is a true determinant of speed strength if we can generate or improve speed strength with an isometric contraction that has actually no movement. Okay, so it has more to do with how fast you can get your muscle fibers to contract than purely just looking at the velocity of an exercise. That being said, once we move on to the speed strength continuum, the shift needs to be done at also seeing a fast velocity because these high velocities are going to be present in your sport. Now, understanding the force velocity and the force time curve. So the force velocity curve kind of uses the speed strength continuum. So what the speed strength continuum is that on one end, you have maximal strength, which would be your heaviest and your slowest quality. Then we have explosive strength, which is lighter than maximal strength, but faster than maximal strength. We have starting strength, which is lighter than explosive strength, but faster than explosive strength. Then we have reactive strength, lighter than starting strength, but faster than starting strength. And then finally, we have pure speed, which would be like sprinting, which would be your fastest modality. But this is a continuum. So the speed strength continuum is at the base of the force velocity curve. So the y-axis, we have force, the x-axis, we have velocity. So if we look at the, on the left, top left, we have maximum strength. So high levels of force, but the velocity point on the curve is quite low. And like I said, we go down the curve, and as we're progressing in velocity, there's a decrease in force. So there's an inverse relationship between force and velocity all the way to maximum speed at the end. Okay. Now, with the force velocity curve, these are the overarching qualities involved in speed strength, but I'm sure a lot of you have seen this force velocity curve, which is more it's a progression of this, if you want. So this is the overarching qualities of speed strength, and this is a subdivision of explosive strength. So we still have maximum strength on top, we still have maximum speed on the bottom, but now the explosive strength family is kind of like segmented. So we have acceleration strength, then a little bit lighter, a little bit faster, we have strength speed, and then we have speed strength, and then we have starting strength. So what happened, it's a little interesting, is I think it was in 1984, there was the study that came out where they were able to measure the speed of contraction of starting strength very clearly and speed of contraction of acceleration strength very clearly. But then there was this like intensity zone where they're like, the acceleration part of it is there, but not fully. The starting strength part of it is there, but not fully. So they didn't really know what that zone was. So that's why they came up with these terms that can be a little confusing. So strength speed it's strength with elements of speed, whereas speed strength, it's speed with elements of strength. But it gets very confusing. So that's why, personally, I prefer sticking to this, as it's a little bit more simple, because at the end of the day, acceleration strength, strength speed, and speed strength are still an expression of explosive power. That doesn't change. Okay, it's just that there's going to be this bridge where the effect, the momentum buildup of starting strength will kind of be blurred with the acceleration component of higher loads, but it's semantics. Okay, so but it's important to understand the subdivision of it. But as a strength and conditioning coach and a practical standpoint, you don't need to worry too much about these terms per se. Okay, so the way I like to look at it is you have heavy explosive strength, medium explosive strength, light explosive strength, which technically associates itself to acceleration strength, strength speed, and speed strength. Starting strength is starting strength, and then reactive strength would be a little closer to maximum speed, which would be your plyometric type of stuff. Now, the force time curve. This is an interesting one because it really showcases the rate of force development. So in team sports, rate of force development is probably your money maker in terms of the impact that it's going to have on performance. The more you're able to improve your RFD, the better the outcome will be in terms of expression of power. So what this means is, so we have the force time curve, where force is the y-axis and time in milliseconds is the x-axis. Okay, in our example, we're going to have an athlete A and an athlete B. So athlete A, so let's say that athlete can squat 500 pounds. Okay, but if we look at the curve here, so I said earlier that 300 milliseconds is the minimum threshold to express maximal strength. And as you keep on going, it can increase a little bit. So him, it takes him a lot of time. It takes him 400 milliseconds to reach his peak weight of 500 pounds. Okay. Now let's look at athlete B. So athlete B can only squat 300 pounds. Okay. But the big difference is in most team sports, most action occurs in less than 200 milliseconds. If we look at it here, athlete B at 200 milliseconds can generate 275 pounds of force, whereas athlete A, although he can squat 500 pounds, at 200 milliseconds, he can only generate 200 pounds of force. So as a strength coach, sometimes it gets tricky because you see these two athletes, and I'm a big strength guy, so I'm like, well, I'm going to choose athlete A because he can squat so much more. He probably has more potential. He does have more potential, maybe. But right now, athlete B is actually a better performer on the field than athlete A, even though his squat is much less, simply because he has a higher rate of force development. So rate of force development is the speed at which you can generate high levels of force. So the key to sports performance, once you start introducing speed strength, is to move that force time curve to the left so that you can generate more and more force in a less and less and less time frame. And to get back to our strength qualities of speed strength, just so you know, like if we look here where the cursor is, that's 50 milliseconds. 50 milliseconds is where starting strength is measured. So when I was telling you guys that it's that quick initial burst where you're overcoming inertia, it's very, very fast. So with tasks like, let's say, punching or kicking, the higher your starting strength, so the higher the amount of force you can generate in less than 50 milliseconds, the better the outcome for you in a performance perspective. Okay, so 50 milliseconds is starting strength, whereas explosive strength will be more around that 200 millisecond. Okay, so athlete A, on a speed strength perspective, he completely dominates athlete B completely dominates athlete A on a speed strength perspective because his rate of force development, his brain's ability to fastly generate force is much greater. Okay, so that's what speed strength training tends to do. And rate of force development is highly affected by starting strength and mostly explosive strength. Okay, and if we look at here, that entire zone here, that's your power zone, whereas here it's your maximal strength zone. Okay, but again, maximal strength is still really important because I said that athlete A still has a lot of potential because he can squat 500. But for me, so let's say that the curve doesn't move at all. We keep training maximal strength, so his curve doesn't change. If somehow we're able to increase the squat from 500 to, let's say, 700, but he has the same curve. Now, of course, at 200 milliseconds, he's going to be able to generate more force. But the reality is by the time you're squatting 500, for me to build you up to a 700-pound squat will, one, take forever, but two, be very counterproductive. Okay, so instead, you're much better off focusing on speed strength to change the curve and shift the curve more to the left so we can make better use of that 500-pound potential. So that's why I was saying earlier, like Schmidt-Blacker is right in the sense that strength is the mother of all qualities, but up to a certain point. At one point, you need to switch the focus to increase rate of force development. So how do we develop speed strength? So with explosive strength, there's many training methods, but here I'm just going to show you guys the ones that we really like here at Kilo. So for explosive strength, the heaviest modality, so whenever you're using the output device and you're tracking your meters per second and velocity on your lifts, your Olympic lift should be between 0.5 to 0.75 meters per second, okay, for the expression of explosive strength. So Olympic lift variation, clean pull, power clean, whatever. So any Olympic lift variation that you like would be used for the context of developing explosive strength. You can use loads from anywhere from 60 to 80% of 1 RM, but I mean, I've been in the industry for 25 years, so I didn't always have the chance to have the technology that we have now. So percentages are fine, but you're better off using the percentage as a guide and then make sure that you're training the proper quality by looking at the actual velocity range that the device provides to you. So at the end of the day, your velocity in meters per second will truly be a better indication of which quality of speed strength you're training. So yeah, Olympic lift 0.5 to 0.75. Accommodating resistance, which still works in explosive strength. We're talking about chains, bands, speed device. This, we like to look at velocities of 0.75 to 1. Now, it does not mean that you cannot train accommodating resistance at 0.5 to 0.75 or 1 to 1.3 meters per second. It's just that we prefer using it for that quote unquote strength speed window, which is your medium load explosive strength. And the advantage of one of the reasons, by the way, why we like accommodating resistance is we have to account for the fact that with faster movements, faster velocities during the concentric with barbell movement, you will have a deceleration component. So the faster you're able to go with a load, the larger the deceleration will occur. Okay, like usually we're talking about the deceleration starting at about 50% of your concentric range of motion. And this is basically a protective mechanism to protect the joint at end range. Okay, so what the bands or chains or speed divide does is it overloads the ascending strength curve so that you can keep accelerating the load, okay, through the concentric range for a longer period of time without having the inhibitory signal kick in too early. So it's not as perfect as ballistic movement, but at least you're pushing away, if you want, the time frame at which the deceleration will occur. Okay, so accommodating resistance, velocities of 0.75 to 1 is our go-to. And finally, we have ballistic methods. So ballistic using medium to heavy loads. Medium to heavy loads, we're talking about like med balls in the range of 15 to 35 pounds-ish. And this should put most of your athletes in that velocity window of 1 to 1.3. So any type of throws and jumps. And now because the implement is being released from your arms, there is no need for that inhibitory deceleration mechanism. So this would be your ultimate, if you want, of explosive strength expression. But these three follows a continuum, okay? Yes, it's explosive strength, but this is your heavy explosive strength, your medium explosive strength, and this is your light explosive strength. And when in doubt, follow the continuum. So if you have a new athlete that's new to speed strength training, don't go, there's no need to go right away to ballistic if you didn't spend time improving the heavier side of your explosive strength component, okay? Always follow the continuum. Now, for starting strength is a funky one. And starting strength, you need a certain level of speed strength experience in order to reap the benefits of it. So you can do ballistic movements, but now you're going to need light to medium weight. So 2 pounds to 15 pounds type of med ball, okay? Throws, jumps, whatever. But the key thing with starting strength when doing ballistic work is it has to be concentric only. So for example, you can lie supine on the floor with a 14-inch diameter med ball. Then you pause there on your chest for a 4-second count. And then you explode. okay? You explode and try to generate as much force and as much speed as possible with that load, because now what we're really trying to do is to teach our nervous system to recruit a ton of motor units and generate a ton of force really, really, really early on to create momentum to propulse this object, because the acceleration component is not as important because the implement is so light that the time of your movement is too short to truly allow a lot of force output. Okay, so you need, when you're training starting strength, you need to be really fresh on a neural perspective, but you need to have a background in explosive strength. To try to build starting strength without first building explosive strength is a little counterproductive. Now, more advanced, so you would start with ballistic, but then you could progress to light inertia. What that is you can work bottom, mid, or top range, but let's say you're doing a squat. You use a power rack. So let's say we're doing mid-range. You adjust the power rack so that the barbell is resting on the side pins with a knee angle of 90 degrees. And then you have your load, which should be light, where you're on the pins, stop for a count of 2 seconds, and then after 2 seconds, you explode, generate a ton of speed. Okay? A good thing you can do is you can add bands. You can add a lot of band tension so that you're not like fully jumping off of the floor at end range. Okay, so the bands will be a little helpful with this because the weight will be so light. We're talking about loads of 20 to 40% of 1 RM here, that the velocities will be so high that if you don't have bands, it's going to be really, really rough on your joints. Plus, your deceleration aspect will kick in way too early. Okay, the velocity here for starting strength is 1.3 to 1.5. And whenever we do the sports performance course here at Kilo, and we have students do starting strength, they're always blown away by how fast they need to be to work that quality. So it's extremely fast. That's why it's easier to start with ballistic first, and then you progress to inertia. And then finally, and even more advanced is dead stop, which is also light. It's the same thing as inertia, but the difference is instead of being overcoming by dynamic, it's relax overcoming by dynamic, which means that you're going to set the barbell and the pins for 4 seconds instead of 2 seconds. 4 seconds will allow to dissipate almost all elastic energy so that your concentric rep is a true expression of concentric force, but you release tension. So the inertia, you're 2 seconds on the pins and you're holding the weight real tight, creating tension. Whereas a dead stop, you kind of release tension, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then bow. So you're basically really teaching yourself to go from 0 to 100 really, really quick. So this would translate really well, for example, to an offensive lineman in American football where they're just standing around. Then all of a sudden, wow, they need to generate force right into the defensive end coming at him. Okay, so really lightweight, longer pause. It's a little bit more challenging. Finally, reactive strength. So your ability to use elastic energy to generate more forceful concentric contraction. Here, we're talking about velocities of over 1.5 meters per second. So it's going to be really, really light, like 0 to 20% of 1 RM. And you can do reactive lift variations, so like reactive bench throws with a Smith machine, for example, or reactive squat jump where you have a barbell on your back, about 10% of your 1 RM, and you jump as high as you can, but then as soon as you touch the ground, you jump again. So you're looking for really short ground contact time. So this could be a good first introduction. And then finally, you can progress to plyometrics, where now this would be your fastest modality outside of sprinting. So here, depending on the exercises, we're looking at velocities of 2.5 meters per second or above. So it's quite high. So we're talking about throws, jumps, and bounding. That will be mostly body weight. So you're not going to add a lot of extra weight because your body weight will provide the forces needed for plyometric work in order to improve reactive strength. Okay, now I'm going to hurry up a little bit. So assessment and implementation of speed strength. So now, you know maximal strength, you know the different strength quality, you know some methods that we like to use for each quality. Now, what do we do with all this? So one very simple, and that's what we're all about. Like I've been in the industry long enough. I want, as a coach, when I'm training a lot of athletes, I want simple, quick, easy to do tests that gives me the information that I need in a flash, in a test that's highly repeatable and easy to do. So the explosive strength deficit, I've learned this test about 23 years ago, and I still use it. It's great. So what that is a squat jump versus a counter movement jump. So your squat jump, which is a jump where you bend the knees at 90 degrees with your hands on your hips, okay, just so it's a true expression of lower body output. So hands on your hips, bend down, knees at 90 degrees, pause for 4 seconds, and then you jump as high as you can. You record the jump height. Then, right after, you do a counter movement jump. Hands on your hips again, but now you go down and jump as fast as you can and record the height. And then you compare both. So the squat jump will be an expression of explosive strength because we're looking at your ability to generate rate of force development, whereas the reactive strength will be an expression of the counter movement jump will be an expression of reactive strength because we're using the dip, that fast dip, as a eccentric, elastic, kinetic energy potentiator to propulse yourself concentrically higher. Okay. Now, when you do the test, if you have athletes that somehow have a higher squat jump than counter movement jump, redo the test. It shouldn't happen. Okay. Like nobody should jump less with a counter movement than a squat jump. Okay. Technically, so you would do these 2 jumps and you would repeat it 3 times and you would take the best of the 3 attempts to finalize your interpretation. So the interpretation, so we're looking at a deficit. So what's my explosive strength deficit compared to reactive? So reactive, counter movement, explosive, squat jump. So as an example, if with the counter movement jump, you jump 30 inches and the squat jump, you jump 24 inches, you simply divide your reactive by your explosive -1, and that's going to give you your deficit percentage. So in this case,
So
Got the same hip thing.
25%. Okay. So what this means, if your deficit is less than 25%, it means that what you should focus on as an athlete is more reactive strength. If your deficit is over 25%, then what you should focus on is more explosive strength. So here's the thing. As a strength coach in the private sector, we often don't have a ton of time to train our athletes in the off season. So if I have time restraint, I want to make sure that I'm going to train the quality that's the biggest limiting factor of that athlete. So if you don't do any types of tests and your athlete is crazy elastic and all you do during your off season is more and more and more plyo, well, you're not really making him a better athlete. You're actually making him more, like you're creating even more discrepancy in his athletic potential because now he doesn't have enough explosive strength. So I like to target what's the biggest missing link. Okay, so I mean, it's pretty straightforward when you think about it because, for example, if my squat jump is 24 and then somehow your counter movement jump is 25, if you only jump 1 inch higher, well, then of course it's very clear, like your deficit will be like 4%. It's very clear that you're lacking elastic energy, you're lacking reactive strength. So that's what we need to focus on. Okay, so that's why I like this test. You do it at the beginning of your SPP. It takes 5 minutes. you have the information now to guide your specific preparation phase in terms of where we're going to focus our speed strength work. So the timing of training methods. So the specific preparation phase, you want to have two blocks. So block one will be dedicated to maximal strength. Okay, maximal strength is the foundation. You need it in order to build speed strength. And then block two will be your speed strength block. Now, if your deficit is over 25%, which means that you need more explosive strength, this is what your macro cycle, your SPP would look like. So block one for maximal strength, phase one, you would do basic concentric work, making sure you make use of the IMCA concept, intended maximal concentric acceleration. Phase two, you could progress to an eccentric method. Okay, like it could be the eccentric hooks, it could be extended eccentrics if you're less advanced. And then block two, so phase 3 and 4, then you move on to speed strength. So the first progression, so the first time you're training explosive strength, phase 3 and phase 4 should be dedicated to explosive strength, but follow the continuum, like I said earlier. So do heavy explosive strength phase 3, and then do medium explosive strength phase 4. If you're a little bit more advanced, you might do medium explosive strength phase 3 and light explosive strength like the ballistic on phase 4. Okay, but this is your first progression if your deficit is higher than 25%. Second progression. Okay, so your athlete is a little bit more advanced. Let's say it's the second or third off season with you and he still scores higher than 25%. Your maximal strength block would be the same, but now your speed strength, you would go from explosive phase 3 to now starting strength phase 4. Okay, but like I said earlier, you need to have experience with explosive strength to reap the benefits of training starting strength. Okay, but at that point, by combining both, you're maximizing, if you want, your rate of force development potential. Now, if your deficit is less than 25%, which means that the focus needs to be on reactive strength, now your maximal strength block will be a little different. Phase 1 will be concentric dominant, but now phase 2 will be isometric dominant. If reactive strength is your weakness, which requires the highest amount of velocity, you cannot afford to do eccentric work in phase 2 because eccentric work is too draining, not only in a neural perspective, but also in a physiological perspective, because eccentric training creates a lot of damage and it will slow you down in your quest to improve elasticity and reactivity. But isometric contraction creates a low level of stress, but it has a higher neural activation than concentric. So it's going to allow you or train yourself to recruit higher threshold motor units to a greater extent, where once you move on to your speed strength block, you'll be able to express higher force potential with your reactive strength training. So in this example, phase 3 could be your reactive lifts, like your squat jump, and then phase 4 could be classic plyometric, like bounding or penta jumps, triple jumps, whatever it might be. And then finally, if your deficit is actually 25%, it doesn't happen often, but you'll see it once in a while. That means that your athlete is balanced. If the athlete is balanced, maximal strength, you can do concentric, eccentric, and then speed strength, you do explosive, and then phase 4, you do reactive. So this is a very smooth, natural progression, if you want, of the speed strength continuum if your athlete is balanced. So, and then finally, if you're interested with Kilo, we have like a whole education platform that's very structured. So look us up on learnkilo.com. But this is it. I'm done with my talks.